The infamous buried bodies case, also known as the Lake Pleasant bodies case, is a mid-1970s upstate New York court case in which defense attorneys Frank H. Armani and Frances Belge kept secret the location of the bodies of two women murdered by their client, Robert Garrow Sr. Robert Garrow Sr. was charged with murdering Philip Double, a 38-year-old mechanic at Syracuse Bakery. Attorney Frank H. Armani was appointed to serve as counsel. The death of Dombolowski, an 18-year-old college student, occurred while camping in the Adirondacks. He was stabbed to death after being tied to a tree. 3 friends were also ambushed, but they escaped, which led to an 11-day manhunt for the killer. Armani, who was not experienced in murder trials, recruited his friend, Frances Belge, an experienced criminal defense attorney, to help represent Garrow. In summary, the buried bodies case was a court case that involved the defense attorneys Frank H. Armani and Frances Belge, who kept the location of 2 murdered women's bodies a secret. Robert Garrow Sr. had confessed to the murders privately, and the attorneys believed they were bound by a duty of confidentiality not to disclose incriminating information about him. 5 months later, the bodies were discovered by accident. Armani and Belge discovered the women's bodies before that, but chose to keep the information confidential. The search for the missing women continued for months as their families grieved. When the public discovered that Armani and Belge had kept this information secret, they were faced with criminal charges and disbarment proceedings. The attorneys argued that they were obliged to keep confidential information to avoid incriminating their client. Armani and Belge were later released from any wrongdoing. In legal ethics courses, this case has become a touchstone. It strongly suggests that lawyers have an ethical duty to keep their clients' information private. It also addresses ethical questions that can arise for lawyers related to confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, and client self-incrimination. The case has contributed to the development of ethical rules on confidentiality. A plea bargain was proposed using the information Armani and Belge had uncovered ahead of the trial. They informed the prosecutor that they might be able to provide information that would help authorities find the missing women if Garrow were sentenced to life in a mental hospital instead of prison. The prosecutor refused. In the summer of 1974, Garrow's trial for the murder of Dombolowski began. Armani and Belge pursued an insanity defense. Garrow admitted to murdering 4 people, including pets and Hawk, while testifying in his own defense. During direct examination of Garrow, Belge asked, "Is that the one I found?" This implied that he was aware of the dead women prior to the trial. The next day, the attorneys held a press conference where they said they had known where the missing women were for 6 months. Garrow was convicted for Dombolowski's murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Armani and Belge were threatened and harassed by the public for keeping information about the women's secret. They received threatening letters and death threats. News outlets said that they obstructed justice or helped the criminals after the fact. Lawyers were criticized for their callousness and lack of concern for the public interest in the public. Armani and Belge were subjected to criminal and ethical consequences. A grand jury looked into the attorney's behavior. Belge was indicted for allegedly breaking 2 state public health laws by not telling people he found the dead bodies. Belge asserted that the conversations about the missing women were confidential and protected by the attorney-client privilege, which prevents lawyers from disclosing protected communication about their clients. He said he could not have told the police about the information. The National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers wrote a brief in support of Belge, saying that attorney-client privilege would be destroyed if Belge was convicted. In the interests of justice, the New York County Court dismissed the indictment. Belge had protected the Fifth Amendment constitutional right of his client not to incriminate himself. According to the court, the report also found the Garrow's disclosure of information about the missing women was protected by confidentiality and the attorney-client privilege. In conclusion, the court stated, "The effectiveness of counsel is only as great as the confidentiality of its client-attorney relationship. If the lawyer cannot get all the facts about the case, he can only give his client half of a defense. This, of necessity, involves telling his attorney everything remotely connected with a crime." The prosecution appealed. The appeals court upheld the dismissal of the claims, but expressed concern about a limitless attorney-client privilege. The article noted that attorneys must protect their clients, but must also observe basic human standards of decency. One of the victim's parents filed ethics complaints against Armani and Belge with the New York State Bar Association disciplinary officials. The New York State Bar Association Committee on Professional Ethics found that the attorneys were ethical when they refused to disclose information about the missing women. If the attorneys had divulged the details to authorities, authorities, they would have violated their ethical obligations to keep their clients' confidential information secret. The ethics opinion said that the attorney-client privilege is needed to make sure clients tell their lawyers all the information they can. Furthermore, disclosure of all potentially pertinent information allows attorneys to craft the strongest defense and protect their clients' rights to the fullest extent. Although both lawyers were ultimately free of wrongdoing, the consequences took a toll on Armani and Belge. Belge abandoned his law practice and relocated to Florida. Armani experienced a heart attack. His law practice was initially destroyed, but he later rebuilt it. 4 years after his conviction, Garros escaped from prison. Authorities found a hit list including Armani and Belge's names when they searched his cell. Police were given advice by Armani about where Garro might have been. Upon receiving this information, police discovered Garro was hiding near the prison. He was shot and killed. The buried bodies case got a lot of attention in the mid-1970s when the Watergate scandal was going on. In refraining from sharing their client's confession, several legal scholars believe Armani and Belge acted ethically. As a result of Watergate, the American Bar Association, or ABA, began to reconsider attorneys' ethical obligations. Meanwhile, law students started to think about how legal ethics should be taught in their curriculum. The model rules of professional conduct of the American Bar Association have been adopted by 49 states. While each state determines ethical rules, all states have an ethical obligation of confidentiality in their code of professional responsibility. The buried bodies case helped shape the development of one of the main exceptions to the ABA's rule on confidentiality. The rule provides that a lawyer will not disclose information relevant to her representation of a client without the client's consent. The case contributed to an exception that allowed lawyers to disclose information if a person was to be imminently harmed. If a lawyer reasonably believes it's necessary to prevent fairly certain death or substantial bodily harm, they may reveal information relating to their client. The exception added by the amendment in 2002 was contested by lawyers who worried that the language might undermine the duty of confidentiality. The case is often used in law school courses to teach students about ethics. Law schools frequently teach the case to examine concerns that arise out of the duty of confidentiality. It's an integral part of professional responsibility textbooks. Legal ethics professors may have also incorporated problems or case studies into their teachings. In the mid-1970s, the buried bodies case provided an example of how ethical issues could be taught from a human perspective with real-world issues. Business schools have also used the case to explore challenges that can arise from role-based obligations. While the case has been turned into a lifelong lesson to budding lawyers, the mother of Susan Petz, one of the girls murdered by Garro, remains discontent by the case. In an interview from 2016, she criticized law schools for teaching this case. She suggested that lawyers should take into consideration the families of the victims when deciding whether to keep information about missing victims confidential. Legal scholars have also criticized the case. Some people say that the attorney's refusal to tell the client the confidential information didn't lead to a better outcome for the client. Others claim that the attorney's refusal to share information with the women's families was appalling. They claim that the attorney should have disclosed information that might provide closure for victims in a way that would not impact their client. Some people have thought about adding a new exception to the confidentiality rules to let victims tell the truth when they are hurt emotionally. Others say that lawyers should not be exempt from laws, like the public health code that says everyone must tell the public about dead bodies. Many books have been written about the case, such as Privileged Information by Tom Alibrandi with Frank Armani in 1984 and Terror in the Adirondacks, the true story of serial killer Robert F. Garro by Lawrence Gooley in 2009. Additionally, it's been dramatized in the 1987 TV film Sworn to Silence and 2003 episode of the TV series Law and Order: Bodies. Noah Hawley, the producer of Fargo, said in 2017 that he would make a movie about the case, but that hasn't happened yet. Needless to say, the case has baffled the greatest minds in law. It stood the test of time as a lesson that teaches the severity of ethics and how not all things can be ethical. It really depends on how far you would go. Let us know in the comments below about other such intriguing cases, and thanks for watching.